Let's have a look at genuine savings. Genuine savings is also known as adjusted net savings. It's developed and maintained by the World Bank, and Kirk Hamilton, who you see displayed here, is its main architect and driving force, and it's the World Bank's measure of weak sustainability. Genuine savings is defined as the net investment in manufactured capital minus the net depreciation of natural capital plus net investment of human capital. The relationship between genuine savings and the environmental domestic product is as follows. Essentially, if you strip consumption out of the environmental domestic product and then take its change, how it changes over time, that is your genuine savings. So it is not interested in current consumption, it is not interested in that at all. It only looks at future consumption. It's explicitly about capital and wealth. The interpretation of the genuine savings index is fairly simple. If it's smaller than 1, if it's smaller than 0, then you're in an unsustainable situation. Then essentially your consumption is financed by driving down your wealth. Whereas if the genuine savings is greater than or equal to 0, then you're weakly sustainable. Weakly sustainable because you're maybe substituting natural for human capital or human capital for manufactured capital, but you are adding to your total wealth. Here we have the definition again. This is the theory. Genuine savings is net investment in manufactured capital minus net depreciation of natural capital plus net investment in human capital. But in practice, they've only been able to measure a few of these things. So in reality, the genuine savings index is net investment in manufactured capital. We have good records, well, we have decent records on that for most countries, minus the extraction of a selection of fossil fuels and minerals, and cutting down of forests. Metals or metal ores, for instance, are not in there. Then in terms of the environment, they only include CO2 emissions, and they value that at $20 per ton, and they only include the health damage costs of PM10, particulate matter. That is small but not very small. Other pollutants are excluded. Damage done by PM10 that is unrelated to human health is excluded. And then for education, the net investment in human capital, they looked at spending on formal education only, so that's education in schools essentially, and they looked at both capital and operational expenditure there. This is a clear limitation. They're obviously not able to measure what they're trying to measure, but of course you can't. It's not their job to collect all this data, right? It's other parts of the World Bank and other parts of the international system and the national statistical offices that are supposed to collect this data. Well, unfortunately, data, more comprehensive data, is missing on a lot of indicators across the world. So what do they find? How does this work? Let's look at an example for Bolivia. So you can take the gross savings here shown as a percentage of income. Gross savings is around 12%. Then you need to subtract depreciation of manufactured capital, so you get to net saving. That's a lot lower. You need to add educational expenses, so you go up again. Then you need to subtract the depletion of natural resources. Bolivia, that is mostly cutting down rainforest. And then you need to subtract the pollution damages, the CO2 emissions and PM10, and then you have your index of genuine saving. So what does this tell you? Well, if you just focus on gross savings, things seem to be fine. Bolivia is doing well. Net savings is actually not doing so well, but it's adding to its capital stock, so that is a good thing. Then you add, when you add education, things are getting better still. But then when you start correcting for environmental stuff, for extraction of natural resources and for pollution, then actually it seems as if Bolivia is growing at the expense of its assets. It's essentially running down its assets. It's sweating its assets. It's not making real money. And that is, of course, an important insight. You can look at these things over time and over space. This is genuine savings rates for groups of countries, and some countries are doing well. East Asia is adding to its stock of wealth. The world as a whole is adding to its stock of wealth. The OECD countries are doing reasonably well, but there's also places that are not doing fine at all. And if you focus on North Africa and the Middle East, for instance, you see that they have been constantly running down their wealth, and that is of course mostly in the form of digging oil from the ground. So that is one thing you can do. You can also look at this across space for any particular year, and what you see is that there's a whole bunch of countries that are making net additions to their wealth in the year 2016, and there's also a whole bunch of countries that don't. Fortunately, there are fewer of these countries, but some of them, Liberia, is doing spectacularly badly. That the adjusted net savings are close to 100% of its income. So essentially, everything it seems to earn and spend really is drawing down savings. So that is drawing down its past savings, drawing down the money in the bank. And that is what you want to use. This is the sort of insight that you want to use the Genuine Savings Index for. What is missing from Genuine Savings? Well, I already alluded to that. In terms of natural capital, there's a whole bunch of stuff that is just not in there. Fisheries are not in there, soil erosion is not in there, water pollution is not in there, diamonds is not in there, iron is not in there. They are working on this in the so-called Wealth Accounting and Value for Ecosystem Services project, but so far there's been no real concrete results there. Human capital is also treated in a peculiar way. They only include additions to human capital, but no depreciation, nobody's dying, no knowledge becomes obsolete, and they essentially assume, and that's the final point that you see at the bottom here, is they assume that if you spend money on school buildings and teachers, then children will learn, which is just not necessarily true. That's one thing, and of course there's also many ways of learning that happen outside of formal schooling. And finally, they make no attempt whatsoever to measure any form of social capital.